Support WrestleTalk!
Give us a subscribe.
Triple H has been in charge of creative for a handful of weeks now. How do we think it is going? Why don't we discuss about it? I'm Luke Owen. That's Tempest. That's Pete. This is the WrestleTalk Podcast, and we are the Blackpool Content Club. Screw you, Ollie and Andy. It is a good name.
Yeah, it's like how, you know how in AEW you've got the House of Black is the trio, and you've got Kings of the Black Throne. We've got LIW. With the addition of Luke, it becomes... With the addition of Luke, it becomes the Blackpool Content Club. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, no, we were just saying that I'm the Malachi Black of this scenario, and you're Buddy Matthews and you're Brody King.
You're Buddy Matthews. We're Malachi Black and Brody King. All right? That's how this goes.
That is how this analogy works.
Yeah.
No, I'm the leader, you guys. Make me the good one. Make me the leader. Anyway, yeah, we was trying to think, like, what do we want to talk about for our first episode of this sort of new experiment that we're doing of the WrestleTalk Podcast, number one, Evil Uno, numero uno.
Numero uno.
And we thought we would talk about, Triple H has been in charge of creative now for a handful of weeks. He's done 2 Raws, 1 Smackdown, and a pay-per-view at the time there. And I think that we've kind of all noticed the various changes that has been made. And I mean, I think the obvious one of that is just like, hey, let's bring back all those NXT stars that I didn't want my father-in-law to fire. So I suppose, Pete, I'll throw to you first. Like, how do you feel that like Raw has been for the last 2 weeks, particularly coming off that SummerSlam?
Exciting is what it's been. It hasn't been, the greatest show known to man or anything, but there's some really encouraging signs, partly through their returns, and I think more importantly, there's an increased focus on things that I like in my wrestling. It appeals to me more, There's an increased focus on longer matches, better quality matches. Increased focus on the women's division is a really nice thing to see. There's a lot of points to it. And even like on the this week's episode of Raw, when you have a subtle story playing out throughout the show, that's just like something we haven't seen out of WWE in such a long time.
I really didn't think they were going to pay it off on that episode.
Right.
I really thought they would just do like the crashed car in the background and like that was it. And they would make no other reference to it. And it would just be a thing like, actually, I mean, in a way, Buddy Matthews on Smackdown. Do you remember like with the who ran over Roman Reigns and everyone was like, oh my God, it was Buddy Murphy because he's there in the background. And it just becomes this Twitter thing for a week. Yeah. So I was really surprised they actually paid it off on that episode.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised. And I think that is, for me personally, because I love subtle storytelling. I love looking into someone's body language or a way they said something or a look they gave or something in a certain thing. And I love like breaking that down and thinking, oh, what does this mean? What does this symbolize? All that stuff. That's my bread and butter when it comes to storytelling. So having like a subtle story play out throughout the entire length of an episode of Raw, I was like, hell yes, I'm on board for this.
So we had SummerSlam, the return of Dakota Kai and Bayley. But I think like focusing mostly on Dakota Kai because she's the NXT star, the fired NXT star that was brought back. And then Monday was much more of an emphasis on her and Io. On SmackDown, we had the return of Karrion Kross and Scarlett. And then on this past Monday, we've had the return of Dexter Lumis. He said Parker Boudreaux there for a second, but no, he's beating up Sonny Kiss on Rampage.
Yes.
So Tim was like, that's 4 episodes of a show now, 3 of which have had returns. Do you think that we're gonna have a period of time where it's like, okay, what? I suppose what I'm trying to get is like, do we have an idea of what the show looks like when it's not the return show? Like how like Dynamite had this for a little bit when it was just like it was debut, and then it's now in a period of time where it's had no debuts, and people have now gone like, the show doesn't seem as exciting as it once did because you aren't just having the big returns.
Right. Yeah, I think the things that are encouraging aren't the returns and the debuts and everything like that to me. It is just more of an emphasis being put on storytelling and making things make sense and making the show more cohesive and more must-see. Like that first episode of Raw, I watched the whole thing. I sat there and I was like, every match here is keeping my attention, because you literally went from an opening promo with Bianca Belair and Becky Lynch and the returns of Bayley and everybody, and then you went right into great matches. You had the triple threat match, and you had Io and Bianca Belair later on that show, and Asuka and Alexa Bliss, and everything made sense within the context of the show. So while yes, the debuts and the returns and everything are like the big exciting things that'll get the most views on YouTube and everything, I don't think that is the drawing factor to me on the show. Like, the show has been more exciting for me because I can look at things, because WWE has always had, like, you know, they're WWE. They have the most cards to play with. You know, they have the most history to pull from, the most footage that they can use, the most prestigious championships that they can rehabilitate. And to just see on the first night that Triple H is really in charge of this show, that they wanted to put together a video package to be like, hey, the US title's really important. This is why you should care about it. And then gave us 3 separate matches on one show to build up that championship. That's the sort of thing that really gets my gears going about this show and about this transition, as opposed to just seeing new faces. I don't know if that's just because the new face has been Dexter Lumis, and it's, you know...
The new faces are also the old faces.
Oh, no, wait, no, I don't want this anymore. But that being said,
Yeah.
I do see the appeal in, like, the returns and everything, and I think once those level out a little bit, I think we'll get to see Triple H's vision that he had in NXT and, you know, what he's wanted for all of his children to go through NXT. I think we're going to start to see that play out on the main roster, and that's very exciting.
So when because I've been off for the last week, so I missed like 2 episodes of Raw. But I actually and I never do this when I'm off on holiday. I watch them because I was really legit curious to be like, what are these shows going to look like? And I watched that first episode of Raw, and I watched it on the BT Sport app, which unfortunately has like the full 3-hour thing.
Sure does.
And because it's American TV, there's like 20,000 ad breaks in there, so you're like constantly like pressing forward and stuff. But I was watching the show, and at no point did I think, like, man, the show's like really dragging. I actually felt that with the second episode, because I felt like it was a great 2-hour show that had an unfortunate 3rd hour still there. Because when I get headlined with like Bobby Lashley and Ciampa, I was like, man, what a great show that was. Oh wait, that's only the top of the 2nd hour. Oh dear, we've got another hour of this. But actually, you know, it finished quite strong. But like that first episode, I was like, man, this is like really flowing really well. Like it's segment into segment into segment, matches. And I couldn't really put my finger on why I really was getting on board with it, just that it was a really good wrestling show. And it wasn't until I watched Ollie's review of it, and he was like, it's because it only had 4 stories. It had like the women's division, it had the US title thing, and I think there were like 2 other things. Like there was just 4 focuses on the show. And I was like, oh God, yeah, that is a really good reason as to why the show feels, because you go back and watch other episodes of Raw that have happened this year, and it's just disparate nonsense that just happens over and over.
I mean, when we were talking about it, when we reviewed Raw, we talked about that show as feeling uninspired. This show felt like it had some inspiration behind it. They had goals, they had things they wanted to accomplish, stories they wanted to tell, and that's like the baseline that you want for a television show.
Isn't that the funny thing? Like, I mean,
now we've got it.
Like the last 2 episodes of Raw, I think as well, really, in the grand scheme of things, broadly fine shows. Like the baseline standard of what a good episode of a TV show should be. But because Raw has been so bad for the last couple of years, particularly like 2021, I think was a really bad year for the show. To the point where like, actually 2022 has been bad as well. We've had people being like messaging in being like, I'm looking back on the Thunderdome era being like, I think that was better. And like, I think now the Thunderdome era of Raw was better than the live attendance era that we came back to. But I think that it's been so bad that these 2 shows being just actually good have made it be like best shows of the year, like high quality. Like the bar was so low that just doing a massive step over it feels like these are 5-star shows. But actually what Triple H is introducing is like, this is our base level of quality and we can just rise from here.
And I think that's the thing, is you're saying that it has such a low bar to overcome, and stepping over it feels like a big deal. It's because that bar felt so insurmountable for a while.
Yeah, right.
Because it felt like nothing was changing in WWE for so long. So the fact that we've now broken that glass ceiling and kind of gone through it and been like, they can change. Things are happening. And it's like me and Tempest said forever on our Smackdown reviews, there's so many negative ones on WWE's program, and these tiny little things that just keep dragging the show down. It's like, this would have been good, but there was this thing that was wrong, this thing that was wrong, this thing that was wrong, which are minor things, but they stack up to be a big deal. And there's so many less of these negative ones now under Triple H's programming. These aren't huge changes apart from the returns, but there's small things that will add up to a much bigger difference. It's exciting.
Case in point, that first episode of Raw that Triple H was in charge of had 2 DQ finishes. They booked 2 matches that they didn't really want to have a finish for, so booked 2 lame DQ finishes on it. The thing I hate the most about WWE programming is booking yourself a match where you don't want to have either person win, so you just do a lame DQ finish. And they did 2 of the buggers in 1 episode of Raw.
Yeah.
And no one is mentioning it because there's so many, there's no negative ones elsewhere on the show. There's only plus ones elsewhere on the show, that these 2 things here don't seem like big deals because everything else is so great. So you're like, I mean, that's not great, but all this other stuff is great. But if you have like 2 bad DQ finishes and everything else on the show sucks, it just highlights how poor these 2 DQ finishes are.
Yeah.
And I was really like amazed when I was listening to the podcast reviews that people were doing of it. Like, no one batted an eyelid at 2 DQ finishes back to back in the women's division as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's a case of it's kind of like the same sentiment as to why people I think are more forgiving of AEW programming, and I think that's what, you know, a lot of people who are anti-AEW or not fans of the product can't understand. Will be like, well, this thing is bad in AEW. Why don't you guys care about this thing that's bad in AEW? And
If they'd have done that in WWE,
if they'd have done that in WWE, you'd have been pissed off about it. It's like, yeah, but there's so much other good stuff on AEW that it doesn't affect you as much. Whereas when you have so much negative stuff stacking up in WWE, it's like, well, this is just another one of the terrible things on this show.
Yeah.
But when you have other stuff that kind of like eases that negative feeling, it's much easier to look at the positives of a WWE show. Like, yeah, it was a DQ finish, but did you see how they gave that match so much time and they look great coming out of it? Like, yeah, it's easy to look past that stuff.
Tempest.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think when I look at it and you say like this is like, it feels like a 5 out of 5 episode of Raw or something like that.
Comparison.
It
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
It feels like a 5 out of 5 based on the standards that we had been used to for so long.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we will say very often, like, you know, whether it be Dynamite or whatever, like you'll see what would be the best show of the week and be like, that was a good episode of Dynamite, 3 out of 5, whatever. But that's still like a 5 out of 5 show if you compared it to Raw's standards.
Yeah.
I think as this goes on, the triple threat episode of Raw, that does not remain a 5 out of 5 episode of Raw. That is a 5 out of 5 episode of Raw following the previous week.
That's right.
But when this becomes the new standard, hopefully it does,
the new
if
3 out of 5.
Triple H is able to just put this on and that becomes his standard of quality, then that becomes the 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
And then you get the opportunity to see the real 5 out of 5 episode of Raw
Exactly.
that I hope comes within like the next year and blows everybody's mind and people actually say like that was the best show of the year, because hopefully it was.
I also think Triple H is very good at it's how you leave them, folks.
Yeah.
Because that second episode, like I said, I thought it was like actually a pretty standard episode of Raw for like the first 2 hours. Pretty good actually, because I thought the Ciampa Lashley match was real good. That was a great match. Also because like it didn't, I think one of the pitfalls that WWE's had with Bobby Lashley is they've made him too OP. And so like literally no one can beat him. But they found a way to make Ciampa like look on his level. It really elevated Ciampa and it made Bobby look awesome at the same time. But then it had that 3rd hour. And when Dolph Ziggler comes out for a match with Chad Gable, I was like, oh, these guys are going to die a death out here, even though one of them is a hometown boy, not that the crowd particularly cared. And then there's like, and the main event is going to be AJ versus The Miz. I was like, eesh, oof, magoof. Like, we are in for a rough old 3rd hour here. But you had that closing moment at the end with Dexter Lumis in the crowd. I've never been a big Dexter Lumis guy. Like I'm not like I didn't have to do the NXT reviews like you did, so I didn't have to sit through all of the Dexter
Are you telling me that all those times you came into our live chat and told us that we were wrong for not liking Dexter Lumis, are you saying that was performative, Luke?
Actually, like a lot of times I come into the live chats on your shows, I'm just trolling you guys. You know, like with the Naomi Sonya Deville stuff, I'm like, it's just long-term storytelling, you guys. But like, so I've never been the biggest Dexter Lumis guy, right? Like even in his Impact days. But like, it was just such a moment of like, it just shot so brilliantly. AJ is mostly in the foreground, and it's just this thing happening over here. And it really did make it feel like someone had jumped the guardrail, someone was trying to. And if you're a wrestling fan, you're like, oh my God, that's Dexter Lumis. But the commentary didn't focus on it. AJ just looked at it, was like, okay, focus on something else. Like, played to the hard camera. It was so brilliantly done that I actually forgot that Dolph Ziggler and Chad Gable had a just a 2.5-star match with no crowd reaction, and like AJ and the Miz had a perfectly fine serviceable Miz match. Like none of that mattered because it's how you leave them, folks. And I think that Triple H I think one of the things he's going to do really well in the coming weeks isn't that he may have like this standard. He'll always have something to end a show on that makes you go, well, I need to tune in towards next week then. He's an Attitude Era fan.
Yeah.
According to him, he created it.
Him and Vince Russo.
Exactly. Yeah. So like in his mind, it's like, well, that's what people liked about the Attitude Era was like, I have to see what happens on next week's show. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Even if that third hour is pretty badass, there's going to be a final moment at the end that goes like, well, next week there's going to be a follow-up to this, so I have to tune in next week to see like at least that first hour of next week.
It's so important, like the ending. How many times do we sit here and we watch like a 4-star match and be like, God, that was great, and then they have a random lousy DQ finish or a count out or whatnot, and then you just go, nah, this company sucks.
It's a really good example of that. Actually, sorry to cut you off there, was the Forbidden Door, the Fatal 4-Way.
Yeah.
That Fatal 4-Way match was incredible, but Adam Cole's injury meant that the finish was really balked.
Yep.
And like the three of us sat there and were like, and it just took the wind out of our sails, it took the wind out of the sails of everyone, and like Moxley and Tanahashi had to work really hard to get the crowd back into it. And they did by the end the end. But that's your point, like that was a great match.
Yeah.
But that butt finish to it, through no fault of anyone's, kind of took the wind out of everyone's sails, and that's kind of what we tend to have sometimes. So you need that finish as well.
You do, and I'm more forgiving in that sense because it's just an injury, and
can't help it.
S happens, and what can you do? But my favorite example to go to is actually from the pandemic era. Pre-Thunderdome, when they were in the stupid performance center. And they did, I think it was Extreme Rules, the horror show at Extreme Rules.
With the Eye for an Eye match.
With the Eye for an Eye match. And on that show, they did Asuka and Sasha Banks, and it was like one of the best women's matches WWE did that year. But then, like, the ref got bumped. Bailey put on a ref shirt and, like, counted the pin, and we were like, what?
That doesn't make sense.
And then Sasha just left with the Raw title, and we were like, well, I was really enjoying that match. Thanks for that, WWE.
Yeah.
And so often the shows themselves kind of feel like that too, where like, even if they have a really good show, so many times it's just the go off the air angle is just lame and uninspiring, and you just kind of finish the show and go, man, that show sucked. Even if it really didn't, because that was a perfect example. Like that Extreme Rules show was a really solid show, but filled with lousy booking mistakes and dumb finishes that take away from the enjoyment of the overall thing. And now I agree. I think Triple H is smart enough to know that you got to send him home happy. And I'm really hoping that that's what we see going forward.
And the thing is, it's not even necessarily send them home happy, it's send them home excited.
Yeah.
Like, whether it is feel-good moment of, hey, this person won, everyone celebrate, that's great. Or it's, oh God, these heels are doing this crazy thing, what are they going to do next? Kind of thing. That's a hook for next week. Because how many times in, like, late 2019 would a Smackdown go off the air of Baron Corbin and cronies do a lame beatdown and then go,
the mid-card
in the ring. And then that's it. That's your ending angle. It's like, there is nothing to enjoy out of that. It's a person we don't like, celebrating and standing tall, and doing nothing exciting doing it. But like you said, Triple H, I think, has enough business sense to know that you need to do something exciting. Even if it is heels doing a beatdown, do an exciting beatdown. Tear up the ring, do a big, like, explosion spot at the stage or something. Like, anything that's going to be exciting or memorable to talk about next week. What's the fallout going to be from this thing?
I think it's all like that second episode that he did. The other moment I think that really caught a lot of people's eye was the Kevin Owens thing. Kevin Owens coming out and powerbombing Ezekiel, who got no entrance into the ring apron, effectively being like, well, this storyline is dumb. So, like, I don't like this storyline, but I do like Kevin Owens. So Kevin Owens they made like very little reference. Like Kevin Owens wasn't like doing the you're Elias. Like it was none of that stuff. It was just he came out, he beat him up for a bit, powerbombed him to the apron, and then that was it.
And then Ezekiel died on his way home to his home planet.
Exactly. And I think we're going to see stuff like that. And I also think the story that they were doing with Ciampa, so he won the triple threat and then he beat AJ. There was a nice little bit in the backstage interview that I think is something that might is going to play off later, which is where the interview, I'm going to say Sarah Stripe, I don't know if it was, could have been Kevin Crabpatrick, I don't know who it was, but she said to Ciampa, I was like, Ciampa, you've just won a triple threat and you're going to be facing up against AJ Styles next. Actually, I think he already won, and you're going to be going for the United States title next week. Miz, you came up short in your triple threat and you lost to Logan Paul at SummerSlam, and now he's also lost to AJ there. If we're having this hard reset of Kevin Owens being like, let's get Kevin Owens back to NXT, I really think we are heading down this path of splitting Ciampa and The Miz, which I have been asking for since the second they put them together, because like that's a very Vince thing to do. Is like, I don't know what to do with you. You're with The Miz. You're The Miz's lackey.
You're The Miz's rookie.
The Miz's rookie. You're Alex Riley. You're Bryan Danielson. Like, that is the role that you are fitting here. But Triple H looks at Ciampa, it's like, no, he's a guy. Like, he's a guy I can like do something with. But rather than just split them apart immediately and just do a hard reset, it's like, well, let's turn this into a story. Let's do a long-term breakup of these two. Like when Ollie was like, doing his fancy booking of like, he's going to win the title next week, and then Gargano's going to come back, and that's going to be your title feud. I was like, whoa, let's pump the brakes slightly, because this is Triple H. I think Triple H is going to do a longer build to this. And maybe they'll have a match, maybe it's not the Clash, maybe it'll be towards the end of the year, and they'll do something like, I don't know, what, TLC, if that's the like last pay-per-view of the year, or maybe like the pay-per-view before Survivor Series.
I think there's so many like different opportunities now, and what makes this exciting for me is because so often, and I've said this forever about the differences that I've had with WWE and AEW, where with AEW so often you could sort of fantasy book these things, and it was fun to be like, well, I wonder what they're going to do next. I wonder how Hangman Page is finally going to split from the Elite. And every week you get a little bit closer, but you're not given the full slice of the pie. But with WWE, it was always like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not even worth thinking about on a long, like, you can do it. You can say like, well, this is what I would do. But when you know that what they do is probably going to disappoint you,
or they just don't do it at all,
or they just don't do it, they just drop whatever storyline you care about and whatever. Like all the things that I said about what they could do with Hit Row. You know?
Yeah.
It wasn't worth thinking that far ahead. But now, even if, because I thought Tommaso Ciampa was probably going to win the U.S. title, just because it was like, oh, that's more interesting than Bobby Lashley as champion at the moment, to me anyway. And then he doesn't, and I was like, my first reaction wasn't, oh, stupid WWE, you don't know what you're doing. It was, all right, well, let's see what you do then. Let's see what your idea is.
Going into the episode, I had two potential outcomes. Was that Miz costs him the title, like costs Ciampa the opportunity to be like, you're trying to overshadow me, and they just do that, the split there. Or he wins the title because the Miz helped. Halfway through the match, when I heard the crowd reaction to Bobby and the crowd reaction that Ciampa wasn't getting, I was like, I think Bobby needs to retain here, actually, because Bobby's so mega over at the moment. But also at the same time, I don't blame the crowd for that lack of reaction to Ciampa, because why would they have a reaction to Ciampa? He's presented, apart from last week, as a nobody, as a mid-card lackey to, or lower mid-card lackey to The Miz. So no one, like that, majority of that crowd didn't buy him as a US title contender. And that's why I think Triple H is smarter than most of us, because he probably also thought, like, this crowd aren't going to buy you yet. Yet being the operative word. We have got to do some work now to get you back up and build you to that level where people could buy you as someone who could beat Bobby Lashley.
I think the point that you were making is one that I wanted to get onto at some point, is that I think the idea of what's exciting to me about Triple H now is that there will actually be continuity from week to week. Stuff will matter, and stuff will have knock-on effects for future weeks. We will see characters go through arcs, and we'll see, character development and all this stuff, which sounds really basic, but it's a lot of stuff that was missing from a lot of WWE's programming, in that, you'll have something happen one week, and then the next week, it doesn't matter that thing happened, because we're just going to do something else, or we're just going to repeat the same thing again, or whatever.
Get it again.
We'll just get it again, and we go through the same arc again and again and again, which means it isn't an arc. And I think it's that thing where we can now say, well, I think they're heading in this direction, is an actual sentence that makes sense, because they are heading in a direction.
Yeah, totally.
And it's that level of excitement that will get even casual and hardcore fans more engaged, because they're going to be more excited about the possibilities of what's to come. And they can talk about it with their friends and be like, wow, I didn't see this thing coming. I wish that this thing is going to happen. What do you think they're going to do next, kind of thing. It's that sort of chatter that you can have among friends that helps you get excited for the next thing. And especially if you're watching it in like a social environment, it's that sort of thing that gets you more engaged in the week-to-week program, because you're more interested in the directions things are going. It's really basic. Goddamn.
I wanted to kind of go back to your point, though, about how you do need to retrain all these people, that someone like Ciampa is someone that you need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And it would be so easy for all of us to go on here and just be like, show still sucks. Oh my God, they haven't pushed this person, this person, this person. Put the title on AJ Styles, do whatever. It doesn't work like that. This does need to be sort of a slower process, because just like how you need to teach fans to watch the wrestling again, you need to teach them which of these stars are going to be important. And you can't just tell them that on the first day. You have to show them that. You have to show them that over a much longer period of time. And that's going to be with people like Ciampa. I'm sure that's going to be people like, if they come back, you know, Johnny Gargano and Candice LeRae. Because there's going to be so many of these people that need to be rehabbed, and he's got a hell of a task in front of him to do them all more or less kind of at the same time.
But it's to us. But to us, we know who Gargano and Candice LeRae are. Like, to us, we know who Dakota Kai and Io Shirai are, or Io Sky or whatever, right? But the majority of the main roster audience aren't watching NXT, and they weren't watching NXT Black and Gold. Even less of them are watching 2.0. So it's not even a case of just like rehabbing them because they had a bad main roster run.
Right.
It's actually introducing them to a whole brand new audience. Like, I would wager 90% of the main roster audience saw Tommaso Ciampa, and like the first time they saw him was Mrs. Guy, Mrs. Lackey, Mrs. Sub Guy, right?
Yeah.
They have no idea of the Black Hearts, like the stuff that he was doing in NXT, the feud he had with Johnny Gargano or anything like that. But Triple H is a guy that's like, well, I know what this is, and I know how to retell these stories. He could easily just redo the Gargano-Ciampa storyline on the main roster, literally from square one, and just redo the whole thing again. Or he could just put together some really awesome video packages and explain to your audience, this is why you should care about these people.
Yeah, I think it goes more with people like, if they wanted to push someone like a Chad Gable.
Yeah.
Who's like a perfect example of just a guy that Vince never got.
Nope.
Never got him, Ricochet, whoever it is. They never got. You need to put in the effort over a longer period of time with those type of guys to make the people see, oh, well, they're not losers.
You had it with Ricochet on SmackDown, beating
absolutely.
Baron Corbin.
Yeah. And that was, you know, there was a little bit of interference from Pat McAfee or whatever, but Ricochet got a win, and they wrestled, and he looked good wrestling because he's Ricochet, and that's what he does.
Like, that match did so much more for him than being IC champ.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Remember when he was IC champ?
And he
my
beat
God.
Shanky?
Great.
Great run.
Oh, God,
So
yeah.
I think like the moments like that, Chad Gable I think is another really good example. And I think what's kind of interesting, we were talking about this in the office before we came in to record this. Like, one of the things we were talking about, like maybe this will be our talking point, is the and actually this kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the behind the scenes podcast we did for Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/WrestleTalk.
Good show, that, by the way.
But it was a fun show,
That was
wasn't
a
it?
lot of fun.
We were talking about like how like this has been a crazy year for news, because we had like Cody going back to leaving AEW and going to WWE, which in February just did not seem like it was going to a possibility. Was like, remember when Sean did that show? It was like, Cody Rhodes doesn't have an AEW contract. And everyone was like, yeah, all right, whatever. This isn't news, Sean. He's just going to re-sign.
Just re-sign, handshake deal.
Exactly, and then he's at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we had all the Wall Street Journal stuff and Vince retiring, and like, it's, man, every week there's felt like this crazy news. And I said, like, what happens next year when there isn't this news? And I can't remember, I think it might have been you that said, like, it's all the jumps. It's the talent jumping back and forth. We are now possibly getting into a Monday Night War era of talent. Like, and it's not going to be like it was in the Monday Night War, because we're now locking people down to longer contracts.
You're not going to have Luger showing up on the show the week after?
Yeah, like, you know, like Miro's signed in for 5 years. Like Malachi Black's in for 5 years. Like a lot of these guys, like they signed their contract, they're in for 5 years. But do we think we're going to be people requesting releases? And, you know, and like, will Tony Khan be, you know, the Vince McMahon in this situation, be like, nope, you're in for a contract for this amount of time, we'll keep you here? Because there's all of a sudden, like, people have been saying, like, since Triple H has been in charge, Andrade, Miro, Malachi Black. There's like a bunch of these names. Keith Lee is another one that I've seen, even though he's a current tag team champion. And people are like, I can't wait to see them go back to WWE now that Triple H will know what to do with them.
It's a really interesting conversation because everyone was itching to see these people get to AEW because they wanted to see the NXT versions of these characters, or at least like a true representation of these characters under someone who knows what they're doing. Triple H is the guy who knows what he's doing with these characters because that's the reason that we fell in love with those characters in the first place. So I think everyone trusts Triple H to have those characters because he knows them. He's the one who presented them in the first place, and that's what got people excited about them. But they've gone to AEW because that was the closest thing that we had to Triple H at the time. We now actually have Triple H, the actual guy.
We've got both guys.
We've got both guys that kind of know what to do with them. And I think there's some people that are going to be more disappointed with some of the people's presentation. I think Miro was fantastic as TNT champion, and since then has been a bit like he was off for a while, and then since he's come back, he's kind of been here and there and not really doing much.
He's cutting great promos.
Great promos, but for nothing really.
That's it. Like the promo we had on Dynamite this week.
Yeah,
like,
it's great.
And there was only one person in the room that I could say this to, and it was my 10-month-old.
Yes.
And I don't think she particularly cared. But I just turned to my kid and I was like, he should be on TV more.
Yeah.
He really should be on TV more.
But it's even like Andrade, who's been kind of like... He's been there in AEW, hasn't really been occasionally he'll have a great match, and that's about it. Malachi Black has looked great with the House of Black. Like, that whole presentation is amazing, but like, they haven't really done anything. They've been in an occasional feud.
No. They've been in one long feud with Death Triangle.
Yeah.
Like, I think JR even said on this episode of Dynamite, like when like Brody King, Malachi, and Buddy Matthews were in the ring together, JR suddenly like was like, wow, they're a really good faction. That's like a really cool looking group. Like, they've got a really good dynamic about them. Like, yeah, I know, Jim.
And I think like it's that sort of sentiment of being like, these guys aren't being quite used how we thought they would be. Then it's not the NXT versions of these characters, and that's not what we want. Maybe they should go back to WWE because Triple H will treat them right. It's a really interesting sentiment. And the thing is as well, someone like Malachi, for example, who was actually sort of already had some of that exposure in WWE, had the new Dark Father character right before he got released. So there's already like enough history on the WWE main roster for WWE to work with to be like, here's Aleister Black back again, and he's got this character or whatever. There's enough for them to use that as a jumping off point, in that I don't think it would feel out of place for them to come back at all. It's so curious. I'm so curious what 2024 is going to look like, because I think Malachi Black signed a 3-year contract in 2021. So I think that expires in 2024, as well as I think Andrade's as well. It's just, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's not long, really, when you think about it. And like, it's funny, isn't it? Because when they, like, WWE did those mass load of releases, released like, it was like 180 people or whatever it was. There was a big list of, there's a big group of names that everyone was like, Tony needs to sign these people up, like, right this second. And to his credit, to his enormous credit, he did. He listened to the fans and he signed up all of them. The problem was, he then signed loads of people. And the problem with they've got 3 hours of television, and there's not enough time to get everyone on TV. So all of a sudden we're now reaping what we sowed. We asked Tony Khan to sign all these people. He did sign all these people, but now we're not getting enough of those people. We're not really getting what we wanted out of this. So now we're in a situation where we're literally like, as Danielson once called us, fickle fans who are like, all right, we'll go back then. Like, go back to WWE and we'll see like what we can do with them instead.
See, I was just thinking the word fickle, because obviously I have not been the most pro WWE person around.
Really?
I know, right? Crazy.
Kel Surprise.
But to me, the goal here has always been wanting the best and wanting to be able to get the most out of the wrestlers. And it was simply a case of like, well, no one is prospering in WWE except for like Roman and a couple of other people.
Baron Corbin.
Yeah.
I said prospering.
Always. No, I think Baron Corbin's prospering in that mid-card. He had a big match at SummerSlam. He'll probably have the rematch at Clash of the Castle.
Probably. But point being, like, it wasn't so much that I needed everyone getting out of WWE. It's just that I wanted to see everyone get booked well.
Right.
And so now it's a matter of, well, there's two places that could potentially book them right.
Yep.
So now I don't really care which side of the fence they're on
Absolutely,
anymore.
because I like both guys. I like Tony Khan and I like Triple H's way of doing things. And and I've got if there's places for them to work, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
And if anything, like if a lot of those do like jump from AEW to WWE, it's not even a bad thing for AEW because it means AEW can focus more on a perhaps smaller pool of talent. Tony Khan is a booker that has shown he's always learning. This is his first time doing a wrestling promotion.
Yeah.
And I think he just got excited that he could sign up a
Tony
load of
Khan
people.
excited? Impossible.
Well, you know, like
in the parking lot.
Coca-Cola will do that to people. Like, just, like, get excited about things. And I think he just got swept up in the idea of signing all of these people.
Yeah.
And he's now looking to be like, uh-oh, I've now got too many people. I think he's probably looking at that 2024 period being like, right, well, I'll address this when we get to it, but I may not need a lot of these people, and if they want to go back to WWE, absolutely. And it's not a win for WWE, it's not a loss for AEW. It's actually just what it is a win for AEW. It's a win for both. It's a win for WWE and it's a win for AEW. A more balanced roster over here and a massive show over here, getting back some stars that Triple H really wants to do. Like he would love to get a Keith Lee.
Oh god,
Yeah.
He
yes.
would love to get Swerve Strickland back.
You know what name keeps coming to my mind that I keep forgetting is in AEW? Samoa Joe.
Oh my
God.
Well, I was he's technically in Ring of Honor.
No, technically. Well, that's another interesting point that I think if you get a Ring of Honor TV deal, some of this is then alleviated, right?
Yeah.
Some of these guys that all of a sudden are on TV once every 4 weeks, once every 6 weeks, then they can be showcased on Ring of Honor every week. And then I think that really does alleviate a lot of that pressure. But I do completely agree that we had for a long time a very bloated WWE roster. And I'm not saying that it was a good thing that they cut 180 people in the middle of a pandemic or anything like that, but it led to a roster that then AEW was kind of bloated. Yeah. And I think if you just get them both to kind of even playing fields, or as even as you can get with their discrepancies in television time, that's where I really think this wrestling war could start to really pick up. Because then you can have Tony Khan doing his long-term booking, like his booking the first year or so of AEW when it was a smaller roster, and it felt like every pay-per-view cycle was meticulously planned out. Now it's like, well, we need big matches every single week.
Here's a
And
TV
I like
special.
those.
Yeah.
I like those
TV
matches,
specials,
but
hell.
I think there's a happy middle ground in which both companies are going to be successful. And I'm really excited for that.
Or, here's the other potential, is that we had a bloated WWE roster that have now become a bloated AEW roster that just goes back to being a bloated WWE roster again.
It's entirely
And then we go
possible.
back to being a bloated. So basically it's just like each company releases a load of people and the other company re-signs them. And then they release them and then this company re-signs them all again.
Yep.
And we just go back and forth. But yeah, I'd love it if we can get to that happy middle ground. Like I'm a wrestling fan that likes wrestling.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like I'm a wrestling fan that if I've got two promotions doing really well, that's great. Like during the 90s and into the 2000s, it was wonderful that we had multiple places that we liked watching. I've never been into this whole tribalism. I've picked my side, and I only want my side to do well, and I want the other side to do bad. I've never really fully understood. I've never understood it with DC and Marvel as well. I prefer Marvel to DC. It's just my preference choice. But it's not like I go to every DC movie being like, oh, I hope this one sucks because it makes my Marvel movies look better. Like I don't finally get that mindset. So if I'm a wrestling fan here and I've got a great AEW product and I've got a great WWE product, I'm a happy boy because coming into work's a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly, right?
I mean, we're going to enjoy watching Raw, and that's going to improve our mood.
Yeah, we're going to enjoy watching Smackdown every week.
Yeah.
Hot damn.
And it's the great thing about that is, and I mentioned this to you when I came back. It's like yesterday was my first day back in the office. Recording this on Thursday, before it goes out tomorrow. And I said to you, I was like, and I still do mean this, but I don't mean it as disparaging as it's going to sound. Dakota Kai and Io Sky, as big returns, I was massively up here for. I'm less so on Killer Cross and Dexter Lumis because, Killer Cross is. I think Killer Cross is a great presentation, but as soon as that bell rings, I'm less interested, and I've got very little interest in Dexter Lumis. However, just across the board, I'm still excited to see SmackDown, because it's not a case of like I'm not the biggest Killer Cross fan, but it's a new main eventer that we've got, and they've inserted him straight into a main event program with Drew McIntyre and Roman Reigns, and that to me is like great, like that's awesome, because all of a sudden SmackDown's main event scene feels fresh, which is what it really needed. If Drew was a great, like putting Drew in that position it's been needed for a while. And adding Cross into that picture as well, now it's a three-way thing. That's even more exciting to me. So yeah, like Killer Cross, I'm like, it's a cool entrance, but ding, 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 I'm not as bothered anymore. But I don't really care, because I'm actually like, I just want to see what this main event scene is going to look like on SmackDown now.
Yeah.
Karrion Kross being the number 2 heel on SmackDown is in fact better than Baron Corbin being the number 2 heel.
I was going to say
SmackDown.
having no number 2 heel, because Baron Corbin was like a number 5 at best, and he was still the number 2.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say that, like, you don't even need these new stars potentially to be the returns of former Triple H guys. I just have so much more faith that guys like Carmelo Hayes are now going to actually be given the chance to succeed.
Oh my god. Like, you know how we always used to get excited about, I can't wait for this guy to be on the main roster?
Yes!
It is literally like what we wanted for NXT call-ups is like, now what's going to happen? If you have someone that you like in NXT and be like, well, I hope we get treated right on the main roster, they probably will now.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
That's great.
I could 100% see Pete Dunne being split away from Sheamus and his cronies and just be coming back to being the bruiserweights and just being Pete Dunne again.
The butcher weight.
I said to Denise on the Final Team Danuke show, like, apparently I didn't know this had happened, but I was like, Mustache Mountain is like, for me, is an easy win. And then someone told me that they've broken up on NXT UK, and I was like, no, did they?
Yeah.
Well, I was like, to be honest, no one watches that show. Just put them back together on the main roster.
No one would know.
No one will know. It's absolutely fine. Like, no one will know. You can get away with it. And I'm like, if you had British Strong Style as a faction on SmackDown, I'd be well up for that, because Pete Dunne's a guy that's been long overdue a push in WWE. The guy's been there for so long now, and it's just been toiling away in NXT UK, toiling away in NXT, brought up to the main roster, and you're scrappy do. Like, that is not befitting of Pete Dunne. Tyler Bate is a guy that they signed when he was 19 years old, and they were pushing him, was like, he is a future of this company. He was 19 a long time ago.
He sure was.
He's now in his mid-20s.
Yeah.
And you have done nothing with him in that period of time. I've had 2 jobs since Tyler Bate was brought in for that UK title run.
I'm not saying he should have been like WWE champion or anything, but he could have broken like every youngest champion ever.
He'd have been a great mid-card champion, and then you can build him up there, and then you can push him into that main event scene when he is ready to be in that position.
Yeah.
But like, he is a guy that I'm from NXT UK, picking him up and just putting him straight to the main roster. Just bypass. I mean, you actually say bypassing. He had a run in NXT. Just like going, he was an NXT tag team champion. Like him and Mustache.
I mean, yeah, he was. Did he have a run in NXT?
It was a short run.
It was a short run,
Sure,
yeah.
they did the rematch, the Tyler Bate and Pete Dunne rematch in NXT.
That's true.
And they did the I think they got the only other 5-star match in NXT, Mustache Man in an Undisputed Era.
Well, it was one of them. It's
Yeah,
the only
it's
one on NXT TV history.
Yeah. So like, he is a guy that I think that Triple H would be like, all right, let's pick you up here and let's just plonk you down there, because he's got a great roster at his disposal across NXT and NXT UK. And to your point you were making there, Pete, I'm now no longer like, oh, what are they going to do with this guy when they go to the main roster? Or what are they going to do with this guy when they bring him up to the main roster? I'm now like, oh, what are they going to do when they bring up Pete Dunne? Or what are they going to do when they bring up Tyler Bate to the main roster?
Yeah, and I think that's why I have a little bit more faith, because even though we've said not the biggest Dexter Lumis fans, stuff that happened in NXT.
You're seeing bring up Indy Hartwell as well. And
I'm
like,
not, no.
doing index on the main roster?
No.
Theory, the leader of the way is WWE champion.
No, none of the above. I was still interested in his presentation that he did on Raw, because it felt different to NXT. Because I didn't really like what they did in NXT, so I was like, hey, it's different. But even so, I think that Dexter had some upside, but it was his booking and some certain aspects of his character that we were like, I'm less interested in this side of things. But him being that kind of like deranged guy that security has to hold back. He has like the wide eyes and that sort of like presentation. I was like, I can believe that for Dexter Lumis. I think that's a good presentation for that character. So just being able to not even just replicate NXT, but know where their strengths lie and be able to play into them is what Triple H is really good at.
I think that is a fantastic point, because how many times have we seen people get called up from NXT, and first of all, just the concept of, here's your developmental brand, we're going to develop these guys, and then you call them up, it's like, all right, let's change everything about them. Let's forget all the development that we've done.
That's what happens when a guy who's running the main show doesn't watch the developmental products.
Yeah.
Idiot. Absolutely idiot. But just the ability to look at what's happening in NXT, look at what works, say we'll use that, we'll figure out what the weaknesses are there, we'll try and hide those as much as possible, and then really accentuate even if it is someone like Dexter Lumis that we're not big fans of. Like you said, there are major positives to his presentation. He is a very good performer. He can have very good facials, very good body language, and just knowing that you can accentuate that without some 70-something-year-old crazy man writing scripts for this. Can you imagine what Dexter Lumis' script would have looked like under Vince McMahon?
I can tell you exactly what would have happened. He would have been the quiet genius. They'd have given him... It was Vince's favorite character that he never really got to do, which is the monster who can solve Rubik's Cubes.
He's actually clever.
That's exactly it. They would have done that with him. He'd have had a backstage segment where he'd been solving Rubik's Cubes, or he'd be like reading poetry or something. Because it's like it's something that Vince has masturbated over for years and wanted to put on TV, but never had a guy that could do it because it's a sucky character.
I don't know if you actually appreciate the joke, Luke. The joke is that the joke is that they're big. And they're also smart.
When Eric Rowan was a vintner.
Yeah,
Vintner. Got this big monster here, but what if he made wine? I smell WrestleMania main event program, pal.
Oh,
so I mean, we got this coming up on Friday, actually. Like, we actually talked about, we got our first example of NXT call-ups coming up this Friday. Nikita Lyons and Zoe Starks. It's Zoe Starks, isn't it?
Yeah,
Zoe Stark.
Zoe Stark.
Zoe Stark.
Sorry.
Is it Stark?
It's Stark.
Is it Stark?
Yeah, it's Stark,
Singular.
and it's Ricky Starks and Zoe Stark.
Is that where I'm getting
Zoe Stark.
I'm not Arya Stark. Like,
right.
Oh yeah, Zoe Stark, right? So like, I don't watch NXT. So like,
Tony Stark. Yeah.
It's Tony Stark.
Yeah.
And but those are NXT call-ups that are coming up to the main roster for this. Well, we presume they are. But I'm looking at that bracket and I'm like, I think there's every chance actually they might make it to the final of this.
I don't know.
I'm trying to think who they're facing against. Is it Natty and Sonya they're up against?
Could be.
I'm going to bring up the thing now. You feel for time. But the point I was going to make was this is our first example of an NXT call-up, literally coming up from 2.0 to the main roster, where we're probably not going to see any changes at all within their character.
I also don't know if this is going to be a full call-up. I feel like they're coming up for the tournament, and then we'll go back to NXT. But it's just a little more... Like I said, it's that thing that I mentioned earlier about continuity. It's that kind of crossover between NXT and making things make sense. These characters that have been on our TV screens, and it's also a crossover of the women's tag belts, because that's what they originally said, was they'd be able to float across all brands and all that stuff, which they never really did. They kind of teased it a little bit, maybe did it once or twice, but like never really followed up with it more than that. So having a tournament that includes an NXT tag team, I think makes a whole bunch of sense.
I agree. I think it makes a lot more sense just to have much more... I mean, get rid of this freaking brand split at this point. For real.
The brand split is
the brand split is dead, but if you just have much more fluid action between Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, and not necessarily in that like the top stars need to be on every episode of every show or anything like that, but just making it feel like anything can happen. Like, people from NXT, it will make sense if they show up on this show.
Yeah.
They won't show up just for no reason and then disappear with no explanation. It makes perfect sense for these two to be in a women's tag tournament, especially when women's tag belts have not had a whole lot of tag teams to vie for them.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like that's actually evident in the brackets. I was just looking at the brackets again. I was like, wow, this is a bunch of thrown together tag teams here.
Sure is.
It is Natty and Sonya that they're facing in their bracket. And the other bracket in there is Raquel and Aaliyah versus Xia Li and Shotzi. Oh, like it's sort of like a rough going of just like names thrown together. And I guess I could see Raquel and Aaliyah going over Xia Li and Shotzi.
Sure.
But that's why I think like you might do Nikita and Zoe Stark, because that feels like the unpredictable side of that bracket. Because if you pick any of those other teams, it's quite uninspiring. But you pick the two NXT quote unquote rookies. Like that's a much more interesting prospect going into the final against, because it's going to be Dakota Kai and Io Sky, and you assume they're going to win.
You'd hope.
But it doesn't matter. Like if they're your eventual winners, go with the NXT call-ups and try and make something out of that.
See, if I could fantasy book for a moment and change this bracket slightly.
You have to do it like Adam.
Yes.
Let me
have a go.
Explosions. Yeah.
No. If I could put one team in there, because I saw someone suggest this on Twitter, I would keep the Nikita and Zoe Stark team as like the NXT dream team of will they make it? Big upset. Have their semifinal match be against Shayna and Ronda. And have them just like, they can put up a fight like they're inspiring baby faces, but just have them like, you don't get to come up here and be part of our main roster. We'll show you and like break their arms, whatever.
This leads into a bigger point that I was going to make earlier, but I didn't want to hijack the conversation. I've got a video on the main WrestleTalk channel coming out of people that Triple H could give a world title run who haven't been world champions before. Shayna Baszler.
Yeah.
Has she not been a world champion?
She's not been a world champion on the main roster.
Has she not?
No. It's absurd, right?
Oh yeah,
She lost to Becky Lynch.
Becky.
Didn't beat Becky, and then has done diddly
And has
dicks
done
since.
Fell down
nothing
the-
since
Just been
then.
circling the drain.
Absolutely nothing since then. She was a women's tag champ for a while, right?
Yeah,
so
with Nia, right?
rehabilitate Shayna frigging Baszler.
Which I think they started that on Smackdown.
Yeah.
Triple H
Yeah.
was like, well, we need a challenger for what's her face, Clash of the Castle.
Yeah.
Well, I'm picking Shayna because I really like Shayna. Make her she's back to being the Queen of Spades again, I guess.
And also, spoilers for that list, also Tommaso Ciampa, and also Chad Gable is on that list. Like, the people who legitimately, with the right push, I think Triple H could really make those names work for a world title run.
Chad Gable is
man.
destined for a great singles run.
I hope so.
Yeah, getting
He's
him out.
so good.
Like I like Chad. Like Chad, my heart belongs to Chad, the comedy wrestler, because I like. I unironically like Shoosh. I think it is funny. Maybe it's because it's from a movie that I like.
I did like it. Then they ran it into the ground.
Agreed, but I do like Shoosh, and I thank you. Like I think a lot of the stuff he does is great, but I am also. I'm yearning. I'm yearning for American Alpha Chad Gable.
He needs to shave his hair off, get a gum shield, and become the wrestling machine Chad Gable. He needs to go on a full Kurt Angle arc.
I was
That's what
about
he
to
needs.
bring up Kurt Angle. Like, what if Kurt Angle didn't get to be Kurt Angle and he was just comedy goofball Kurt Angle? Like, he's great at that.
Yeah.
But if that's all you let him be, Kurt Angle's not going to be talked about as one of the best wrestlers of all time.
So I've actually recently just rewatched this. I was like, I was doing some editing, and when I'm editing, I tend to just sort of put on some wrestling in the background. I'll pick a pay-per-view at random, and I'll just throw that on as like background noise. AEW, WWE, WCW, whatever. I threw on the episode of Raw where it was during the invasion when they did the big ECW reveal, right?
Yeah.
Because I was like, it is a mess of an episode of Raw where they did 6 weeks of storyline in actually not even one show, in half an hour.
Yeah.
Like, they literally brought out ECW and then had a 10-on-10 match, and at the start of that match, the WCW guys telling the WWF guys, and ECW and WCW announced the alliance. Oh, and Stephanie McMahon's like the owner of ECW. It was this mess of a half hour, which is a glorious, glorious mess. But lost within that is Kurt Angle's babyface turn, where Kurt Angle, just a couple of weeks beforehand, had been tiny cowboy hat and singing songs like Jimmy Crack Corn and all of this with Austin and McMahon, just doing backstage comedy segments. He then does one promo where he is like, I'm serious. And the crowd went ballistic for him. You can do that with Chad, where you'd be like, yeah, I've been doing this for a while, but now I'm serious, son. And you go on the serious run again. And like you can easily do it with him because he's good enough to do that.
And the thing is, he's such a likable person.
Oh, yeah.
That he can genuinely, he's like, it's what I mentioned in the video, plug in for the video, that you can genuinely get like a proper like goodwill underdog babyface story going, kind of like a Daniel Bryan type thing. Like, people will legitimately galvanize behind him because he is that good. I want Chad Gable to do well.
Yeah.
I want
See, it's
Chad
fun
Gable.
to talk about, though. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Isn't it
fun to
nice?
be able to look at this and be like, there's actually hope.
We wouldn't have
for
had this
once.
conversation 3 weeks ago.
No, absolutely not. And you can have the same conversation about like half the people on the roster, whether it's Shayna, whether it's Mustafa Ali, whether it's Dijak, whether it's like so many people that we haven't even discussed on this podcast.
Yeah.
Half the roster now has like a chance for the first time. And it's just so inspiring to sit here as a wrestling fan and to know that there's more good wrestling ahead of us than there was behind us. It's awesome.
Do you know what's also great about all this as well is that, there's all this excitement we can talk about, but it is still WWE because there was that Amos squash match on Raw.
There was.
Because when Amos wasn't on TV for a few weeks, there were people in our live chats being like, I think Amos is done. Like, I think he's just not a Triple H guy. He's just not going to get a push whatsoever. He was in that squash match, was like, nope, they're still going with this.
He's still there.
The more things change, the more they said, this is still WWE, and we're still going with the Amos thing. And I think it's the same with Austin Theory. I think like he'll get his first name back, and he'll just because I think Theory doesn't work as a name. I think Triple H is smart enough to realize he should be Austin Theory again. But I am now like curious of what they do with him with Money in the Bank, because the plan that they would have had for him with Money in the Bank is probably out the window. Like with a new guy in charge of creative. Not that I think they had a plan for him to begin with. Look at Otis. But I am now like because people like Austin Theory's not been on the show for a few weeks. I think his push is done. He is a Triple H NXT guy, though. And a guy that they really do like. So I don't think they're just going to completely bury him and he's never going to be on the show again.
No.
But I am mildly curious to think, like, I'm not as excited as I am with, like, a Ciampa push or a Gable push or a Shayna Baszler push. But I'm like, what am I going to make of this Austin Theory push?
It's noticing his strengths and weaknesses, which is what he kind of did in NXT, and that they debuted him in NXT as this guy who'd like rockets or something. It was some weird thing that just didn't work, and then they changed him up and they brought him into the way, and he was a very naturally funny, goofy character that worked really well for that. Whether they want to play off that and go back to the more goofy comedy side of things, or Triple H has seen other positives in him that he's going to accentuate, I don't know. But I do think that he's probably going to be used a little bit better than what he is currently, where he's going to be on every single show talking about how he's going to cash in at SummerSlam. It was really boring every time. But, I'm hoping it's going to be a bit better than that.
Yeah, I think less repetitiveness of his promos
that'd be
and
nice.
stuff, yeah.
And just in general, less repetitiveness across the shows.
I was thinking, when I watched that second episode of Raw that he did, and it was Seth versus Angelo Dawkins, I was like, in another time, this would have just been Seth versus Montez again.
Right.
Because it was a really good match the week previous, and
Yep.
Vince was doing like, do it again, pal.
Yeah. It was like the Fightful Select report that said, like, for those who were thinking that Vince McMahon still might be, like, controlling from the shadows or, like, not really leaving WWE, apparently a WWE source said to them, it was like, there's no way that SummerSlam or Raw would have been like that if Vince was still in control.
The show?
Yeah, like, it would have been SummerSlam rematches on Raw. Like, that just would have been a thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. It's Triple H's vision. you know?
Full transparency. Like, I was one of those guys that was like, I reckon Vince is probably still going to be pulling on the streets. Not because of what I was seeing on the product. Watching the product has made me realize that is not the case. Like, even before Sean's report of that came out, it's like, you watch SummerSlam, you watch that episode of Raw, and you watch that Smackdown, you're like, no, these are just Triple H shows. The only reason I had those Vince McMahon thoughts is because it's Vince McMahon.
Yeah, it's
like,
Vince McMahon.
He can't let go.
Yeah.
Like, he is always, like, even when he stepped down as CEO, he was still head of creative. Like, he's done this his entire life.
Yeah.
He doesn't sleep because this is all he does. I thought it would be a very difficult thing for him to let go, but I'm pleasantly surprised, wonderfully surprised, that Triple H has got full 100% control on this. And that is, and like, I'm so thrilled by that. Because I really did have this thing in the back of my mind. I even joked with you about this, that when the news came out that Vince has retired, my first thought was like, I bet you he hasn't. Like, this is just a public-facing thing, and like he'll still be doing the show. Like when Vince Russo was fired from TNA, and he's no longer booking the show, and then Vince Russo, the big idiot that he did, sent across a running order to Mike Tenay, but accidentally sent it to Mike Johnson, a PW insider, and that's how we found out that Vince Russo was still booking TNA. Like, I thought that's what'll happen. That's the situation we're in. I was so wrong, though, and I'm
Yeah.
happy to be so.
Genuinely, when the news first happened that Triple H was head of creative, it was like Hawkeye in Endgame. Be like, don't give me hope. And then like a couple weeks later, I'm like, oh no, I'm hopeful. Oh my god.
Hope Van Dyne. Well, let's wrap this episode up. We've got any closing thoughts we want to share about the possible exciting times we've got ahead of us?
Red, hope is a good thing. That is my closing statement.
Yeah, I got not too much else to say.
Yeah.
Should be good, I think. We talk about it for an hour. If you want TLDR, it good.
It's good.
I mean, I was thinking about, during this, I was like, what's the thumbnail this going to be? It might just be Triple H face with "This is exciting." I genuinely be my thumbnail for this. Or maybe I'll go with Pete's idea. It's good.
It good.
Yeah. But I think that's going to do it for this first episode here of the WrestleTalk Podcast in this guise, I guess, because it's all the WrestleTalk Podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, let us know what you thought. Let us know in the comments down below what you're excited about for Triple H-led creative, what you think might happen with AEW, what might happen with Ring of Honor. Like, let us know in the comments. If you've got a topic that you think you'd like for us to discuss on next week's show, leave that in the comment down below as well, because we'll be reading them and checking them out. We can bring those up on next week's show. But until then, I've been Luke Cohen. That's been Tempest. That's been Chopper Pete Quinnell. And that was the Blackpool Content Club. Jam that jam.